Dearest listeners, before we explore the exquisite torment of capturing perfection, allow this author a small indulgence. If these chronicles of the heart bring you some measure of delight, I should be most grateful if you would grant me a token of your favor with a like. Do subscribe so that you never miss a dispatch from my desk, and pray, leave a comment below. I am endlessly curious to know from which city or county you receive my whispers. Now, with such matters attended to, let us begin. Lady Isabella Montrose was, by all accounts, what polite society deemed an unconventional beauty. Where other young ladies boasted porcelain complexions and demure expressions, Isabella possessed skin kissed by too many unauthorized walks in the sun and eyes that held far too much intelligence for comfort. At 22, she had already exhausted 3 governesses, declined 4 perfectly suitable offers, and driven her dear mama to the very brink of nervous collapse. This author has it on good authority that Lord Montrose, in a fit of paternal exasperation, had declared that whosoever managed to secure his daughter's hand would receive not only her considerable dowry, but his eternal gratitude. Enter Lord Reginald Ashworth, a man of impeccable breeding, substantial fortune, and all the romantic appeal of yesterday's pudding. One must confess, gentle listeners, that watching Isabella attempt enthusiasm for her betrothal was rather like observing a cat pretend affection for a bath. This author witnessed them together just last week in the Montrose morning room. His lordship had brought a small, velvet-lined box for her inspection. Inside, nestled on satin, lay a Roman denarius. "Observe, my dear," he droned on, oblivious to the profound lack of interest in her eyes, "the remarkable preservation of the Emperor Tiberius's profile. The artistry is, of course, crude by modern standards, but its value is undeniable." Isabella's gaze drifted to a window overlooking the garden, her expression one of desperate, intellectual starvation as she murmured a perfectly polite, "How fascinating, my lord." The Tun, naturally, declared it a splendid match. This author, however, detected the distinct aroma of impending disaster. It was Isabella's dear mama, Lady Montrose, who inadvertently lit the fuse to this particular powder keg. In her determination to commemorate her daughter's betrothal, to capture, perhaps, the one moment her daughter looked suitably placid, she commissioned a portrait from London's most sought-after artist, one Mr. James Thornhill. Ah, Mr. Thornhill. Would you believe, dearest listeners, that a man who spent his days surrounded by beauty had remained impervious to its charms? At 28, he had painted duchesses and debutantes, captured countless loveliness on canvas, yet never once had his professional composure wavered. His studio in Bloomsbury was legendary not merely for the masterpieces it produced, but for the artist's complete immunity to the wiles of his subjects. He treated beauty as a technical problem to be solved with light and shadow, not as a force to be reckoned with. This author finds it rather delicious that fate chose to destroy Mr. Thornhill's celebrated detachment with a single commission. But I digress. Let us witness the moment when artist met muse and both their worlds tilted irrevocably off their axes. The first sitting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late April, when London's temperamental weather had decided to gift the city with unseasonable warmth. This author happened to be taking tea with the Dowager Countess of Pemberton, whose townhouse provided an excellent view of Mr. Thornhill's studio entrance. Pure coincidence, one assures you. Lady Isabella arrived punctually at 11, accompanied by her lady's maid and looking thoroughly mutinous. She wore a morning dress of pale blue muslin, selected, no doubt, by her mamma for its demure propriety. Yet somehow, on Isabella, even propriety managed to appear rebellious. Mr. Thornhill, this author later learned, had been preparing his studio with his usual methodical precision. The light was perfect, the canvas pristine, his brushes arranged with military exactitude. He was, by all accounts, completely unprepared for Lady Isabella Montrose. One can only imagine his expression when she swept into his studio, bringing with her the scent of jasmine and an air of barely contained wildness. Witnesses report, and this author always protects her sources, that Mr. Thornhill actually dropped his favorite brush. For an artist of his caliber, this was equivalent to a soldier dropping his sword mid-battle. Their first exchange was brief but telling. Isabella announced herself with characteristic directness, warning that she excelled at neither sitting still nor looking vapid. Mr. Thornhill, the man who had painted royalty without a tremor, found himself utterly speechless. He merely gestured to the sitter's chair, his composure for once completely fractured. Gentle listeners, steel yourselves for what happened next. The first sitting lasted precisely 4 hours, during which Mr. Thornhill made exactly 3 brush strokes. The rest of the time was spent in what witnesses describe as intense observation. Isabella, for her part, forgot to be rebellious. She sat with uncharacteristic stillness, caught in the beam of an artist's gaze that saw not just her surface, but every hidden depth beneath. When Lady Montrose arrived to collect her daughter, she found them not in strained silence, but in animated discussion about the use of light in Caravaggio's work. Isabella's eyes were bright with intellectual passion, her carefully arranged curls somewhat disheveled, and her entire being radiating an energy that had nothing to do with propriety. He uses shadow to reveal truth, not just to hide things, Isabella was insisting, gesturing with an energy that made her mother blanch. It is what is unseen that gives the light its power. It speaks to a certain honesty, don't you think? An honesty many find unsettling, Mr. Thornhill replied, his voice low. Most of my patrons prefer the flattering light of Sir Thomas Lawrence to the brutal truth of Caravaggio. Because they prefer pretty lies, Isabella countered instantly. My fiancé, for instance, believes beauty is a matter of perfect symmetry, like his coins. I find perfect symmetry to be dreadfully boring. True beauty has character, does it not? A flaw, a slight imperfection that makes it unique. Mr. Thornhill, who had been listening with rapt attention, finally allowed himself a small, sad smile. Lord Ashworth, then, is a collector, he said quietly, his eyes meeting Isabella's in a look so charged with understanding it was a scandal in itself. An artist knows that beauty is a feeling, Lady Isabella, one that defies calculation. Lady Montrose cleared her throat with the force of a cannon shot, horrified by this display of intellectual intimacy. But it was too late. Mr. Thornhill already looked as if he had been struck by lightning and was still determining whether he had survived the experience. Oh, dearest listeners, if only you could have witnessed the delicate gavotte of denial that followed. Over the subsequent sittings, and there were many for Mr. Thornhill, suddenly found the portrait required exceptional attention to detail. Our 2 protagonists engaged in the most transparent charade of professional indifference this author has ever had the pleasure to observe. Mr. Thornhill, who had previously been known to complete portraits with breathtaking efficiency, now discovered endless imperfections requiring correction. The light was never quite right. The angle needed adjustment. The background demanded reconsideration. One afternoon, he spent a full hour adjusting a single drape of velvet, his knuckles brushing Isabella's shoulder each time he passed, a contact that was both professionally necessary and exquisitely torturous for them both. Any excuse, one noticed, to extend the hours spent in that sunlit studio. Isabella, who had initially protested the sittings as tedious, began arriving early. She would claim the traffic was unexpectedly light or that her morning calls had been cancelled. This author finds it amusing that a young lady who had never before shown the slightest interest in punctuality suddenly possessed an urgent need to maximize her time in Bloomsbury. She began bringing books with her, reading aloud while he worked. Her voice, reading tales of Gothic romance and passionate poetry, became the unofficial soundtrack to the portrait's creation. During one such session, she recounted a witty tale from her childhood, involving the strategic replacement of salt for sugar in the shakers at a dreadfully dull diplomatic dinner, just to see if anyone would notice. The story was told with such dry wit and rebellious sparkle that the sound of Mr. Thornhill's genuine, unguarded laugh filled the studio. It was a rich, warm sound that startled them both. He caught himself immediately, clearing his throat and returning to his work with a renewed but entirely false professional focus, though the ghost of a smile remained on his lips for the rest of the afternoon. Society naturally began to talk. Lord Ashworth expressed mild concern about the portrait's extended timeline. Lady Montrose fretted about the propriety of so many sittings, though she was somewhat mollified by the presence of Isabella's maid, a dear girl named Alice, who, blessed with a peaceful disposition and a love for comfortable chairs, had developed a convenient habit of falling soundly asleep in the corner, her gentle snores a constant, gentle counterpoint to their charged conversations. This author particularly treasures the account of one Lady Pemberton, who called upon the studio unexpectedly and found Mr. Thornhill teaching Isabella the proper way to hold a brush. Their hands were touching, gentle listeners, in broad daylight, for a full 3 seconds. The scandal. Yet still, they persisted in their performance. Mr. Thornhill spoke of Isabella only in terms of artistic challenge. Isabella mentioned Mr. Thornhill merely as that painter fellow. But late one evening, long after Isabella had departed, Mr. Thornhill stood alone in his studio. He paced before the unfinished canvas, a battle raging within him. This author has heard from a most reliable source that he would stare at the portrait for hours, trying to see it with a painter's eye, only to be confronted with the memory of her voice. He was a master of his craft, a man who controlled every line and shadow, yet he was losing control of the most important subject of all, his own heart. He picked up a piece of charcoal and began to sketch on a loose sheet. Not the posed subject, but Isabella, as he saw her in his mind, laughing at her own story, a rebellious glint in her eye. It was a sketch filled with a life and tenderness that the formal portrait, for all its technical brilliance, had yet to capture. But even the most stubborn resistance must eventually crumble, and on a gray Thursday afternoon in May, our protagonists finally acknowledged what the rest of London had seen for weeks. Isabella had arrived at the studio in distress. Lord Ashworth had that morning presented her with his grandmother's betrothal ring, a monstrosity of diamonds and duty that sat upon her finger like a shackle. She tried to hide her unhappiness behind a brittle cheerfulness, but Mr. Thornhill, who had spent weeks memorizing every nuance of her expression, noticed immediately. The light in her eyes was gone. He set down his brushes with unusual care. He walked over to her, his professional distance dissolving. He observed, with devastating simplicity, that she was unhappy. Isabella, for once, did not deflect with wit. The dam of her composure broke, and she admitted the truth with a vulnerability that transformed the studio from workplace to sanctuary. Rising from her pose, Isabella moved to the window where the gray light cast shadows across her troubled features. Mr. Thornhill followed, drawn, one suspects, by the same invisible thread that had been pulling them together since that first meeting. She confessed that the ring felt like a lie, that her entire future felt like a beautifully decorated cage. This author nearly required her vinaigrette when Mr. Thornhill responded by gently taking her hand. Not in the manner of a painter adjusting his subject, but as a man unable to witness the distress of the woman who had, quite without his permission, claimed his heart. His advice was simple: don't wear it. In those 3 words lay a universe of possibility, of rebellion, of choice. But for Isabella, it was not so simple. "And what would you have me do instead, Mr. Thornhill?" she challenged, her voice a raw whisper. "Defy my family? Break a formal betrothal? Create a scandal that would ruin not only myself, but my sister's prospects? Become a pariah for the sake of a feeling?" The weight of her reality hung between them. He did not release her hand. "I would have you be happy," he replied, his voice equally quiet, but firm, with a conviction that shook her to her core. "Whatever the cost." Isabella looked up at him then, her eyes searching his, and what passed between them in that moment transcended words. Here was understanding. Here was recognition. Here was the terrifying, exhilarating acknowledgement that what existed between them had moved far beyond artist and subject. The maid, bless her perfect timing, chose that precise moment to snore loudly from her corner, breaking the spell. Our protagonists sprang apart, but the damage, if one may call such beautiful destruction damage, was done. The truth hung between them like a completed painting, impossible to ignore or uncreate. Isabella murmured that she should leave, though she made no move to do so. Mr. Thornhill reminded her the portrait wasn't finished, though both knew he spoke of far more than canvas and paint. Isabella departed shortly after, but not before removing Lord Ashworth's ring and leaving it on the windowsill, a small, silent act of rebellion that spoke volumes. One might assume, dearest listeners, that such a moment of clarity would lead directly to happiness. Alas, the path of true love has never been so accommodating, particularly when propriety and promises stand in the way. The very next morning, disaster struck in the form of Lord Ashworth himself, who arrived at Mr. Thornhill's studio unannounced. His lordship spent considerable time examining the portrait in progress, his expression growing increasingly pinched. He declared that it didn't look like Isabella, though what he meant, one suspects, was that it looked too much like her. For Mr. Thornhill had captured not the demure bride-to-be, but the vibrant, intelligent, passionate woman that Isabella truly was. Words were exchanged. Lord Ashworth questioned whether so many sittings were necessary. He implied, oh so delicately, that perhaps Mr. Thornhill was taking advantage of his position as a mere artist to spend an unseemly amount of time with a lady of quality. He mentioned with studied casualness that the wedding had been moved forward to the following month, a clear warning shot across the artist's bow. Mr. Thornhill, to his credit, maintained his composure. But something in him shifted. When Isabella arrived for her sitting that afternoon, she found a different man. Professional, distant, correct. He announced they should work efficiently. He avoided her eyes. Gentle listeners, this author could weep at the pain that flashed across Isabella's features. She had arrived buoyed by yesterday's connection, only to find Mr. Thornhill had retreated behind his professional facade. What followed was perhaps the most excruciating sitting yet. Mr. Thornhill painted with mechanical precision while Isabella sat in wounded silence. The very air in the studio seemed to mourn the loss of their easy conversation. Isabella, displaying the pride that was both her strength and weakness, refused to acknowledge the hurt. She sat perfectly still, the ideal subject, while inside this author knows her heart was breaking. When the sitting ended, she rose with dignity and moved toward the door. But at the threshold she paused. She observed quietly that Lord Ashworth had clearly paid him a visit. Mr. Thornhill's brush stilled as he confirmed, without looking at her, that her fiancé was concerned about her reputation. Isabella's bitter laugh could have curdled cream. She noted how considerate everyone was about her reputation while thoroughly ignoring her happiness. She left then, and Mr. Thornhill made no move to stop her. In the privacy of her chambers that evening, Isabella picked up the heavy betrothal ring from her dresser. This author has it on good authority that she did not weep. Instead, she sat staring at the cold, glittering diamonds, a feeling of profound, silent entrapment settling over her like a shroud. 3 weeks passed, during which London society buzzed with wedding preparations. Isabella attended fittings with mechanical compliance, a beautiful automaton going through the motions of a life she no longer wanted. Lord Ashworth spoke of honeymoon plans to Italy, to view more coins, no doubt, with characteristic obliviousness. And through it all, the portrait remained unfinished at Mr. Thornhill's studio. He had sent a curt note stating he required no more sittings, that he could complete the work from memory. This alone should have alerted everyone to the situation's gravity, for what artist claims to need no further reference to his subject? But society was too caught up in wedding fever to notice. This author, however, noticed everything, including the fact that Mr. Thornhill had not been seen at any of his usual haunts, that his studio lights burned through the night as if he were a man possessed, that he had refused 3 new lucrative commissions from prominent families. It was Isabella's younger sister, Lady Marianne, a delightful creature with more sense than the entire ton combined, who finally intervened. She appeared at Mr. Thornhill's studio on a Wednesday evening, brushing past his manservant with an aristocratic determination that would not be denied. What she found there, gentle listeners, would have moved even this cynical author to tears. The studio was in a state of creative chaos. Canvases lined every wall, and each one depicted Isabella. Not just the formal subject, but dozens of studies, sketches in charcoal, watercolors capturing a fleeting expression. Isabella laughing. Isabella reading, a frown of concentration on her brow. Isabella with her hair caught by a stray sunbeam. It was a room transformed into a shrine, not to a society beauty, but to the multifaceted woman he truly saw. And at the center of it all stood the artist himself, paint-stained and exhausted, adding final touches to the official portrait. But oh, what touches they were! Every brushstroke was a declaration, every color choice a confession. He had painted not just Isabella's likeness, but his own heart onto that canvas. Lady Marianne proved herself worthy of this author's admiration by taking in the scene with one comprehensive glance and immediately calling him a fool. "She is a ghost at her own wedding feast, Mr. Thornhill, and you are the one haunting her," she said, her voice devoid of pleasantries. "She does not eat, she does not sleep, she merely endures. Is that the masterpiece you wish to be responsible for?" When Mr. Thornhill stiffly replied that Lady Isabella was engaged to a man of appropriate rank while he was merely a painter, Marianne's response was swift and sure. "My sister has spent her entire life surrounded by men of appropriate rank. They bore her to tears. You, sir, are the first man to ever see her as more than a pretty face with a dowry, and you mean to let her marry a coin collector out of some misplaced sense of nobility? Do you truly believe she cares for rank over happiness?" Most importantly, she revealed that the portrait was to be unveiled at a grand gallery exhibition at Somerset House the following evening, the night before the wedding. All of society would be present. She concluded her magnificent tirade with a challenge. "If you have something to say, Mr. Thornhill, tomorrow night would be the time, unless, of course, you prefer to spend the rest of your life painting shadows of what might have been." The gallery at Somerset House had never seen such a crush. It seemed all of London had gathered, drawn by the promise of Mr. Thornhill's latest masterpiece and the delicious proximity to the Montrose-Ashworth wedding. Isabella arrived on Lord Ashworth's arm, wearing a gown of midnight blue that made her skin glow like pearl. She smiled and nodded, every inch the proper bride-to-be. Only this author noticed how her eyes searched the crowd with a desperate, hunted look, looking for one particular face. Mr. Thornhill was notably absent as the guests mingled. The portrait, everyone noted, remained covered on its easel at the gallery's heart, a silent, veiled promise. Lord Ashworth preened beside it, accepting congratulations as if he had painted it himself. "A perfect likeness, I am assured," he proclaimed to anyone who would listen. "Thornhill has captured her delicate, docile beauty perfectly." Finally, as the clock struck 9, the gallery director called for silence. This author positioned herself strategically as the velvet cover was drawn away. A collective gasp, sharp and sudden, echoed through the space. The portrait was, quite simply, magnificent. But more than that, it was a revelation. Mr. Thornhill had indeed captured Isabella perfectly, but not the tepid, docile version Lord Ashworth expected. This was Isabella with fire in her eyes, a hint of a rebellious smile on her lips, and an intelligence that seemed to illuminate the very canvas. This was Isabella as she truly was, unconventional, passionate, glorious. And everyone could see that this was Isabella painted by a man desperately in love. Lord Ashworth's face progressed through several unflattering shades of purple. Lady Montrose reached for her smelling salts. The ton collectively held its breath. It was then that Mr. Thornhill finally appeared, walking through the crowd with determined steps. He looked exhausted but resolute, like a man who had made peace with his fate. He apologized for his lateness, explaining he had one more detail to add. His eyes never left Isabella's face as he moved to the portrait and, with careful precision, added a single brushstroke to the bottom corner. When he stepped back, everyone could see what he had done. There, worked into the painting's corner in letters so small they might have been missed, were the words, "To capture such beauty is impossible. To love it is inevitable." This author confesses to requiring her own smelling salts at this point. Isabella stepped forward, her movement dreamlike. Lord Ashworth reached for her arm, but she evaded him with unconscious grace. The crowd parted as she approached the portrait, and the man who had painted his heart onto canvas. She asked simply, her voice carrying in the sudden silence, "Is it true, Mr. Thornhill?" He, abandoning the last vestiges of propriety, met her gaze. "Every brushstroke," he confirmed, his voice for her alone, yet heard by all. "Every moment in your presence, every sleepless night since, all of it is true." Well, gentle listeners, what followed next will be remembered as one of the great triumphs of the London season. Isabella turned to Lord Ashworth with a smile that managed to be both apologetic and utterly unapologetic. She removed his ring, again, and placed it in his hand with gentle finality. She released him from their engagement clearly and publicly, stating he deserved a wife who could love him properly, as her heart was otherwise engaged. Lord Ashworth, to his minimal credit, accepted his dismissal with the reasonable grace of a man who knows he has been thoroughly outmaneuvered. Isabella then turned back to Mr. Thornhill, who looked as if he couldn't quite believe the turn of events. She informed him that he had ruined her for tepid marriages and appropriate matches, and expressed her hope that he was prepared to take responsibility. His response was everything one could hope for, a promise to take responsibility for the rest of his life if she would have a mere artist. Isabella declared she would have the man who saw her truly, regardless of title or fortune. This author believes there may have been an embrace at this point, though the exact details were obscured by Lady Montrose's dramatic swoon and the general uproar that followed. Mr. James Thornhill and the former Lady Isabella Montrose were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony that managed to be both scandalous and perfectly right. She became his most frequent subject and fiercest critic. He became her gateway to a world of art and passion she had always craved. Their portrait now hangs in their Bloomsbury home, a daily reminder that love, true love, reveals itself in how we see one another. Their salon became a celebrated hub of intellectual and artistic life in London, a place where genuine talent was valued over titles. And this author is pleased to report that Lord Ashworth eventually married a perfectly appropriate young lady who not only enjoys his coin collection, but can also distinguish between the reigns of Tiberius and Caligula. A true match of minds, it seems. Lady Montrose recovered from her shock and now boasts about her son-in-law's artistic genius to anyone who will listen. And now, dearest listeners, I must turn to you. Did this tale of artistic passion and a love revealed on canvas move you? Your likes are the modern equivalent of a well-placed compliment, and I shall treasure them. Pray, share your thoughts in the comments. I find myself endlessly fascinated by your perspectives. And to ensure you are alerted the very moment my next dispatch is made public, do subscribe and perhaps even engage that curious little bell icon. A rather insistent contrivance, I am told, but a most effective one for ensuring one never misses the latest news. Until our next encounter, dearest listeners, remember, the greatest scandals often lead to the greatest happiness. And sometimes, just sometimes, love is bold enough to announce itself before all of society, one brushstroke at a time. Your devoted chronicler, Lady Ravenswood.